Retro.
Are you an aspiring Jedi, or do you dabble with the dark side of the Force?
Regardless of whether you fancy yourself a defender of the light or an aspiring Sith Lord, you're going to need a lightsaber.
Podcast Stardust is pleased to partner with Saber Masters, the creators of high-quality, durable, and affordable lightsabers.
Saber Masters is preparing to launch the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0, and right now you can get 2 for the price of 1.
So, check out the link in our show notes and go get your Ultimate Lightsabers from Saber Masters.
And don't forget to use our referral code Stardust to save $10 at checkout.
And each purchase using our referral code helps support Podcast Stardust.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Hello, Star Wars fan, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And it's time to get into this week's episodes of The Bad Batch. But before we do that, Jay, I want to remind everybody where we can be found around the internet.
Super easy to do. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. This will be our discussion of episodes 10 and 11 from Season 3 of The Bad Batch, and they are called Identity Crisis and Point of No Return. So I think we're going to try and talk about them in turn, but there will inevitably probably be some overlap between the two episodes as we go through these, and This will be a full spoiler discussion. So let's start off with Identity Crisis. Jay, you want to go ahead and give us the summary of that episode?
Absolutely. On Mount Tantiss, Emerie reports to Dr. Hemlock that progress in the lab has stalled with Nala Se's removal. Emerie is then promoted to chief scientist and learns about the specimens, which are Force-sensitive children being held in the vault. Hemlock reinforces the importance of Omega's blood as a binding agent and the importance of finding her. Meanwhile, Cad Bane acquires another Force-sensitive child, and Emerie struggles with the plight of the children in the vault.
Right. An interesting episode that I think is going to give us several discussion points here. What did you think about this one overall?
So good. Oh my gosh, so good. And I love the way that this is setting up so many different kinds of things. Obviously, this is kind of a linchpin episode, I feel like, that has answered some questions for us in some ways, but has also definitely presented us with others. And I have so many different questions and theories about some of the things that were happening in this episode, and I cannot wait to bounce those ideas off of you. But I love both of these episodes, and even though it was not your typical, go in and let's have some action by the Bad Batch kind of thing, it was so good. It was such good Star Wars, good storytelling all around for me. But how do you feel?
Oh, I certainly liked it. It was very much of the same tone as the first episode that we had of the season, where we found Omega on Mount Tantiss and everything was bleak and uncomfortable and quiet and stuff like that. It was weird to pair this episode with the next episode, which has a very, very different type of tone to it. And it answered some questions and it raised some others. It clarified some things for me and then confused me in a few other places when it came down to it. So I'm looking forward to discussing this one as well. And so let's kind of get into some of the details. The episode starts off with this city carved into the side of a mountain on a frozen type of a world. They don't identify it. I turned on both the closed caption and the audio description, and they didn't name it in either.
Right.
And I don't know if they'll get around to telling us in the episode guide at some point, but those details aren't available yet on StarWars.com, so I wasn't able to find out. And we get these hamster aliens, which were based off of a critter we saw in Solo when Han and Lando were gambling for the first time. And one of them is this child, a baby, you might say, who happens to be force sensitive, and it throws a vase with a force, which catches everyone's attention. And then there's a couple people that are like, "Oh, he's got that gift, and that's that could be bad luck." And this woman says, "Don't talk about those things. That bad things happen." And then we get an Aqualish that makes an anonymous call for a class 1 bounty hunter because he knows that the Empire is looking for these force sensitive type of kids. I knew exactly where this is going when I saw it, and I was not particularly surprised to see Cad Bane show up after that. But how about you?
Well, there was a couple of things with this that, I thought of in regards to, first of all, where was this Aqualish, as far as being on this planet, and just so happened to know about class 1 bounty hunters that are looking for force sensitive children. That seems like quite the coincidence there. But one of the things that struck me about this was the fact that, as you said, the one alien was saying, "Oh, don't talk, we don't talk about those things," and they actually called it kind of a curse, that the child is cursed. And I thought, wow, what a difference the galaxy looks at force sensitive children now, in
Mhm.
light of everything that has happened with, Order 66 and the Jedi and the rise of the Empire and everything like that. And I also thought to myself, gosh, I'm really glad that toddlers don't really actually have the force, because that could be dangerous.
Yes, it could. Just imagine the terrible twos with a force sensitive child.
Exactly.
That could be something. Yeah, yeah. It was an interesting observation you made there that the galaxy, or at least people are aware of, it's not good to be found having the force right
Right.
now. And on the one hand, I get it because the Jedi were the famous force users across the galaxy, and look what happened to them. And now it sounds like there are whispers going on about, hey, did you hear about the Joneses kid? He got caught using the force, and a bounty hunter showed up and took him away in the middle of the night, type of a
Mhm.
thing, as why I could imagine that going. It was interesting use of that alien species too, because it took me a while to figure out where I'd seen it before. And it wasn't until I actually got onto StarWars.com that everything clicked into place for that one.
Mhm.
So the bulk of this episode then takes place at Mount Tantiss. And first off, we see Hemlock kind of up in a lab doing some work, and he's got this data pad, and it looks like he's got big cloning vats or something in there as well. And I can't tell if he was working on Project Necromancer, Dark Troopers, or what was going on exactly there. What was your take?
Well, I kinda thought it was Dark Troopers, honestly, when I saw that, and I also picked up on, I have to say, the music was very, through this entire episode, was very eerie, but it was almost sort of akin to, like, a Frankenstein vibe. And I
Hmm.
thought, "Oh gosh, that's, like, totally perfect for Hemlock." But, yeah, I was trying to see, because I watched this episode twice, and I was trying to look for different, types of details each time, but I was thinking Dark Trooper.
Yeah, and that's what I thought of at first based on what I could see on his data pad.
Right.
But I wasn't sure if that was making any sense to me
Mhm.
because we know Moff Gideon had his own version of the Dark Trooper project that ultimately culminated in him cloning himself. Okay, well that seems to be in line with what Hemlock is doing,
Mhm.
but the first phase of these Dark Troopers were droids. And that's not what Hemlock's doing at all, or what we've seen of
Mhm.
him in the past. So like when I was saying earlier, some things got clarified and I got confused about others. This is one of the things I was getting confused about. I just
Mhm.
don't understand how he fits into that project. And skipping ahead a little bit, he has a conversation with Governor Tarkin.
Yeah.
I absolutely love this. Tarkin calls him up and is all annoyed that there's all this financial stress being put on his budget because it's going to Tantis for whatever his project is. And Hemlock just completely shrugs him off. Now, this is a project that's personally important to the Emperor.
Mhm.
And then Tarkin's ears perk up on that. Oh, well, maybe I can be of service. It's like, no, the only thing you can do is help get that funding I want.
Yeah,
Then
and
he
he
lets
throws
him
it in, he
go.
goes, "It's classified."
Yeah.
Like, he's like, "Nope, you can't have that information. It's classified."
And the fact that Tarkin doesn't get that information out of him, that's quite a role reversal from the end of season 2. of the Bad Batch because they were having that summit on that whatever the planet was that Tech died on,
Right.
and Hemlock showed up and was attempting to put like a best foot forward in front of Tarkin, and now Tarkin has had a personal visit from the Emperor and is hey, shoes on the other foot.
Yeah.
You want to know what I know and you can't.
Mm-hmm.
So it was weird seeing someone kind of put Tarkin in their place.
Yeah, and the way that he said, To what do I owe this summons?"
Hmm.
It wasn't even like this visit, this call, it was this summons, and he
Yeah.
all said it with such disdain, and I'm sure it's because he's feeling very, proud of himself for one, but the fact that his project, as he said, is of such personal interest to the Emperor kinda gives him a little confidence, and maybe his overconfidence will be his weakness.
Yeah. And this is the difference between Hemlock and Krennic, because
Mhm.
Hemlock does have this personal connection with the Emperor. Krennic didn't. And that's
True.
why Tarkin could lord it over him and boss him around and then take the project from him,
Mhm.
because Tarkin was an intermediary there and Hemlock doesn't have one. He's got the Emperor's ear directly on that. So,
Mhm. Right.
okay. But then Emerie shows up, who we also know as Dr. Carr. I'm not sure if we knew that before or not, but
I was gonna ask you about that. That
yeah.
she actually has a last name, where none of the other clones have last names.
Yeah, that struck me as odd. And there is apparently some sort of bad blood in their history, because over the course of the conversation, we find out these four sensitive children being held in the vault. Emery says something along the lines like, they'll be discarded. I can't. She makes it sound personal, like this is something that had happened to her
Mhm.
in the
Mhm.
past. Still don't understand how she's got this last name, but she's Dr. Carr. And Emery shows up and says the lab has stalled due to Nalase no longer being around. And so, we got to do something. And then so eventually Emery proposes that she become the chief scientist. And then once Hemlock agrees to that, she is brought up to speed on Project Necromancer, shown the vault, which has the specimens, which blows my mind that we're calling children specimens.
Right.
And they're keeping them safe and is of utmost importance there. Okay, this is one of the things I'm confused about. What did they tell Emery she was doing here on Mount Tantiss all this time? And how was this project running at all if Nala Se got removed and she was such a key linchpin to the whole thing?
Right, those are some really great questions, and I think that for Emery, she was completely given sort of an assignment that kept her close, but not close enough to where she could figure out what was going on, and with all these clones until she started working a little bit more with Omega, and then by proxy, seeing what was going on between Omega and Nala Se. So, I do think that there was they were utilizing clones like Emery to do some things, but weren't telling them the whole story, as far as what
Yeah.
what they were doing. And so, for Hemlock, I got the feeling that this was his way of keeping Emery close. That yes, he was going to give her this job of chief scientist, but I'm not quite so sure that he's doing it because he trusts her or if he's doing it because he wants to see what she'll do with it and maybe hoping that somehow she'll screw up and then he'll be able to benefit from that.
And see, here's the other thing about it is that when Omega and Crosshair were making their escape from Tantus, we knew that her blood was one of those vials that was in the um, I can't remember the machine
Centrifuge.
centrifuge. Thank you.
Mhm.
That was spinning around, and eventually got to the top. It got tested, and it revealed a positive result. And so Emery, bursts into the control center and tells Hemlock, wait, Omega's a match or positive or whatever the case it was. Well, did she not understand what that meant at the time? And she was just completely waiting for a machine to tell her that, yes, this is good. And she had no idea what that meant. You see, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you have a
Mhm.
doctor running this when it could have been any lab technician that could have done it?
Mhm. No,
You
that's
wouldn't
a
have
good
needed
point.
you wouldn't need anyone special. So, I mean, I know why we got all this explanation. It was to bring us as the audience up to speed on this, but it kind of muddles everything that's happening there in Tantus as far as, in universe workings and explanations.
No, I agree. It's very similar to Dr. Pershing in a lot of ways. You
Mhm.
know, that he was kind of brought on board for his particular expertise, and then once he kind of figured out what was going on, he wasn't super happy about that, and I think that Emery is sort of in the same kind of boat, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into that here in just a second. But so she's shown the vault, and then there's these children that are the specimens, and we have a Mary Ellen, we have an Akachi, and I guess the blue kid is a Pantoran.
That's what I guessed, yeah.
Yeah, but it was not obvious to me what that was, if that was the case. And Emery's told, not to have too much personal contact with the specimens because they're scientific resources, nothing more, which is
Mhm,
again cold.
mhm.
I was expecting to see a little bit more in the vault, though, based on the Emperor's prior visit, because it looked like they opened some sort of a casket and showed him something in there that he was impressed to see. So we didn't see anything like that. But what was your thought on that?
Yeah, exactly, they did not show their whole hand in this
Hmm.
episode for sure, but gave us just enough to be able to say, "Oh my gosh, like, this is what they're doing." And, yeah, and these 3 young children, as you pointed out, and Emery was asking, "Well, why children? Why not adults?" And, Hemlock goes on to say, "Well, they're not quite as," uh, how did he put it? He said that they're not quite as resistant, and they're much more amicable, they don't resist things, and they don't fight it, and they don't question it, and they just do what they're told to do.
Right. And there's not that many adults around anymore
Oh, yeah, he said that too, yep.
because those were
Mhm.
the Jedi, and almost
Mhm.
all of them got killed.
Yeah.
And those that didn't are on the run and they can't find them. So, and that's what the Inquisitors will be for, obviously, later.
Right. Well,
So,
one thing, and I've been dying to ask you this, and I guess
mhm,
this is as good a time as any, is that I keep thinking about Jedi Fallen Order and the map that they were able to find, Cal Kestis was able to find, and then eventually destroy with all of the force sensitive children on it.
mhm.
So this has got to be like right around that time. So I'm wondering, is this after that, and they're trying to, go back and scrape the galaxy, if you will, for these force sensitive children, and that's why they are employing these class 1 bounty hunters and all of these networking kinds of things because they did have some maps in place and now they don't, and that was really sabotaging this
See,
whole
I
project?
think you have the timeline reversed because Fallen Order would have been after this.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
we're just a year or 2
So this is
removed from the
creating.
end of Revenge of the Sith here with the Bad Batch, whereas Fallen Order was what, 5, 10 years later?
That's
Because,
right, yeah, because Cal was in hiding for a
yeah, he was a
while.
kid
Yes,
when
okay.
Order 66 came down, and then, when we see him later, he's a young adult. So,
Okay, so if we flip it, do you think that there's still some relationship to this? Like, the kids that they're finding now then are on that map?
I don't think so because,
Okay.
let's think, Cad Bane gets a tip about someone that was demonstrating some force sensitivity, and so they found this kid that way, and it was not the result of any use of a map. This, now that you bring this up, it kind of calls into question that whole holocron that had all those kids in it.
Mhm.
There, because if that was something that was created by the Jedi all those years ago, well, those wouldn't be kids anymore. Those would be teenagers and young adults at this point. So,
That's true, yeah.
huh. Well, we'll have to put a pin in that and come back to it for some
Okay.
another podcast someday because
Right.
that's interesting. I'd have to go back and look into the details of that holocron and what it meant. And maybe it was maybe they were treating a holocron as a repository of knowledge as opposed to something that the Jedi would necessarily exclusively use. But that's not the impression I get about what holocrons are.
Mhm.
So,
Right.
yeah. So, we get up to speed on Project Necromancer. The other thing that comes out is why it is that Omega is so important to them. We've had this idea of M counts and midichlorians, as we found out in the last episode of the Sage Ventress, out there. But now Hemlock is talking about it's not possible to replicate a high M count from the source. Omega's blood was a binding agent that was necessary. It's the only one that they've been able to find to use to replicate a high midichlorian count. So the implication that I'm getting here is that you take the midichlorians from one host, you combine it with something from Omega's blood, and then you can successfully carry over that M count into a clone or to another body. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, what is the binder? Is it some sort of, DNA? Is it some sort of, just like a marker in terms of when you think of different kinds of blood, you have A
Mhm.
positive, O positive, O negative, all those kinds of things. So I didn't know if maybe that was, she just happened to have that perfect one to bridge and make things compatible. Cause you know that there's like a universal blood type.
Right.
And so, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
The quote is Omega's blood is a binder proven to be compatible with their DNA to recreate their M count levels. That's most of it's not quite a perfect quote, but that's pretty much what was said. So it is the blood itself. And so it could be like you're suggesting, is it the plasma? Is it the red blood cells, or what is it that's in there that
Mhm.
you can plan? It seemed would seem logical, maybe the plasma in there or something like that. And then you combine it with the DNA from the other host, and that's how you successfully transfer the midichlorian count in there. The question this raises for me is, that mean that Omega herself does not have a high M count? What do you
That she
think?
just has the binder, you mean?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and, and I wondered about that too in some way because it kinda brings us back to where, with Asajj testing Omega for different things. And, we left that one with, does she really think she's force sensitive? Does she think she's not? And this is making me wonder if she's not, and it's just that specific binder that they're looking for and nothing else.
Yeah, and I've got a couple of conflicting thoughts on this, because at the end of that prior episode, Crosshair tells Asajj, "You're lying," and Asajj is very evasive of responding to that. But her big response is that if she has this high M count, then she'd have to be trained, which would mean that she would have to leave you, and that's not the best idea. Which sounded like, to me, she was telling Omega that she didn't have a high M count, even though she did, because it was a way to protect Omega from
Mhm.
having the additional scrutiny. And the beginning of this episode makes that make much more sense.
Mhm. Yeah, that's
When you
true.
demonstrate that type of force sensitivity, then people notice and you get turned in. But then Hemlock is not talking about her M count. Hemlock is talking about the quality of her blood. And then, uh, you know, Emerie goes and talks to LSA about that in a little bit here. And, in the genesis of that conversation was these specimens are children. And LSA saying, I did what I had to do to protect Omega. And it was kind of like, what, at the expense of the other kids? And so there was that. But I'm also wondering if Hemlock just doesn't realize that Omega has a high M count. That what they were testing for was the capability of a binding agent, because they weren't expecting any of the clones to necessarily be force sensitive, but they were testing all their bloods for the potential of being capable of being this binding agent
Right.
there.
Right.
So maybe that's the explanation that you reconciles these two.
Yeah. Wow. They're really making us think, aren't they?
Yeah.
I love it.
So okay, so there's that. Then we've got Emerie working with these kids. We've got mm, find my notes. Okay, so we have SP-54, which is Eva. She's an Akachi girl. We have SP-32, which is Jax, and he's the Miralan boy. And then we've got this unnamed Pantoran child as well. And Eva keeps trying to warm up to Emerie, and this is when Hemlock had told Emerie to not develop any personal connections with them because they're just scientific assets and nothing more. And it's clear these kids had some sort of a relationship with Nalase, and they want to know when they're going home. And eventually Jax makes a run for it, steals Emerie's data pad, but doesn't get very far, and then gets put down in lockdown. And Emerie's lack of knowledge about what happens to these kids as punishments ends up leading Eva to believe that, she lied to her there. So it's
Mhm.
very, uh, this deserves more discussion than we're going to give it, but we're going long on this episode alone. So I want to make sure we get to the second episode. But what did you think about this interaction with Emerie and the kids?
Yeah, it's easy to do to go long here because there's
Yeah.
so much to talk about. Well, just the numbering system. stood out to me right away because SP is probably specimen, but
Mhm.
then we have 54 and 32. So obviously there's a lot of space between 32 and 54. And where are all those kids in between? Because I'm thinking that they probably give them their numbers based on their acquisition. You know what I mean? Like when they were acquired. So Jax was probably there much longer than Eva because he has a 32 and she's 54. To your point about having a little bit more of a relationship with Nala Se, because Eva calls her mistress Nala Se to Emerie. And you're right. I mean, just from the get-go, Eva was like, I like your glasses. She's so sweet. She's so cute, this
Mhm.
little one. And, they were talking about like whenever they get to go home. And Nalase said she would find out for me, and she hasn't found out for me. Will you find out for me? And it's just setting up more and more and more. But this little Pantoran, we'll just call him a Pantoran. I think there's a reason why we haven't heard anything out of this one just yet, and I think that that's probably coming because I don't think that was done by accident.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I felt for these kids,
For
and I
sure.
did like it when Emerie, you could see Emerie's conflict over this when she's
Mm-hmm.
talking to Darth Bane. When she's talking to Cad Bane about, where'd you get this kid from? How many have you done? And Cad deflects all these questions. And he's like, let's just say I'm good at my job. And, that question reveals more than you realize. So
Yeah.
Cad can tell that she's not on the same level of everybody else in the Empire on this.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end, when Eva's upset because she believes that Emerie lied to her about what happened to Jax, Emerie digs out Omega's old doll and leaves it for her,
That
which
was
was
the
such a nice little
sweetest.
touching moment.
It really was. And it's obviously showing that we knew already that Emery had some sort of compassion, for Omega, and she's got much more than that, I think, for these kids. And that's why I
Mhm.
was saying back when we first started talking about this that I feel like Emery is going to end up being a real asset to these force sensitive children and to the clones.
Yeah, agree. Okay, any last observations on that episode before we turn to the point of no return?
I don't think so. Just great to see Cad Bane and Toto.
Yeah, fascinating episode. I really liked it.
Mhm.
Okay, well then let's turn to episode 11 of season 3, the point of no return. How about the summary on that one, Jay?
The CX clone locates Fee and finds out the location of the Bad Batch on Pabu from her ship's logs. He then proceeds to Pabu, and the Empire invades the town once he gets eyes on Omega. The Bad Batch had been preparing to leave, but the CX clone gets the drop on them. Wrecker is knocked out when the Marauder is destroyed. Hunter attempts to steal an Imperial gunship, but the CX clone thwarts that plan. Fearing for the citizens of Pabu, Omega turns herself in, believing that the Bad Batch will be able to track her back to Tantiss, but Crosshair misses his shot when trying to land a tracker on the CX clone ship as it leaves Pabu.
Yeah. So this one is a very different type of episode from the prior one. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I thought Wrecker was a goner. I really did there for a minute. And the whole idea of Omega giving herself up, I understand why she did it, but it's like, oh my gosh, why did you do that? But it shows how much she's matured, which is insane, from the very beginning of the series and to see where she is now. And this one was brutal. Like it was very unsettling in a lot of ways. And I was kind of surprised at the level of brutality that we saw visually. I mean, sometimes it's always been just kind of hinted, but there was a lot of stuff going on in this
Yeah.
particular episode that was almost kind of cringy in some ways. But you didn't really know like anybody was going to be safe. I mean, what was happening? But yeah, it was a great episode. So great. What
Yeah.
do you think?
Yeah, there was a lot of tension in this one, and I was afraid for all of our clones until I remembered there's still stuff in the trailer from that came out for the season that we haven't seen yet.
Mm.
And so it takes place someplace clearly different. And so then I was like, okay. I was very shocked that the Marauder got destroyed at this point.
Yeah.
It was like the Razor Crest getting
Yeah.
blown up in season
Thank
2
you.
of The Mandalorian.
I was like,
Uh,
wow, rip to the Marauder.
yeah, I was okay. If they had to do that, I'm glad they did it towards the end of the season. We've
Hmm.
got 4 episodes left after
Hmm.
this. one here, and so it's not like the Mandalorian having to get a new ship. Now, granted, the Mandalorian's got a pretty cool Naboo starfighter at this point, so I can't complain too much about that. But still, at least I guess they didn't make a Hasbro
HasLab.
Marauder. Yeah.
Backings.
Like they did with the Razor Crest there. So so there was that. But yeah, the CX clone and the Empire just really handed it to the Bad Batch throughout this episode. Got the drop on them with blowing up the Marauder, and then Wrecker getting knocked out, pulling Gonky over the side of the dock, and then Hunter looked like he was gonna get away with a gunship until the CX clone shot the pilot so that it would crash. But Crosshair, what was going to happen with him was still a mystery, because like I said, we haven't seen that in any of the trailers or anything like that. And wow, this episode was, as you said, it was brutal and it was cringy. The Empire showed up. They showed up in full force, conducting door-to-door searches, getting ready to put the torch to people's homes, being very unforgiving. You've been harboring a known fugitive. Well, did they know that? Was there really this all points bulletin to everyone about this clone out there? Or is it just being the Empire being brutal and coming up with justifications like we've seen so often? This series has not given the Empire any opportunities to be sympathetic at all. And frankly, I'm there for that, because I don't like the excuse that, a lot of these people are just doing the right thing. No, you're not. You're torching people's homes.
Right.
Tell me how that's okay. So
yeah, and blowing up, because they were basically blowing up every means of possible transportation off of that planet. So all of their ships, all of their, skiffs, everything. And even the mayor was saying, you've destroyed our livelihood, you've destroyed our way of life, all for this. And that CX clone was just very matter of fact and said, yep, we'll keep doing it until you give her up. So I have to ask, do we still kind of think that the CX clone is tech?
No,
Okay.
I'm beginning to think not. I'm glad you asked that, because that was one of the things I want to talk about as well. And here's why: because I feel like we were given some stuff that could lead us to believe that the last time we saw him, with what he was saying to Crosshair, like, you could have been one of us, but you chose the wrong side, and how personal it seemed to be between the CX clone and Crosshair there. But this clone had apparently no prior knowledge of Pabu, and Tech had been there. That was the last planet he'd been on before, I can't remember the name of the world is that he died on. And so to me, I feel like if that is Tech, then there's going to have to be some explanation as to why he didn't think to go here himself first. But what do you think?
Yeah, I know. I'm battling with that as well. And the only thing I can come up with is that if it is Tech, that the Empire wiped some of his memories, and just scrambled his brain a little bit. And unbeknownst to them, he actually had that in his memory that they could have used, and they didn't realize it. They just kind of sabotaged themselves for that reason. But, then there was that line that he said, the CX clone said about Fee's logs, and he said, oh, I decrypted them. I broke the code. And so I was like, okay, that's a very Tech thing to do. But
yeah, and that's the other thing. Tech and Fee had a thing going on before he died, and there didn't really seem to be any touch point with that. They which seems like a missed beat that you want to put in there as well. And I guess the other thing about it is that, they could have really enhanced his other abilities. But this guy was such a sharpshooter, which, not that Tech was missing things, but this is Crosshair level of ability that we're seeing from the CX clone, which is not really in Tech's wheelhouse.
Yeah, that's true. And then I know that there were some that were wondering if this could possibly be Cody.
I mean, I suppose, but
because Cody is a good shot.
yeah, but have we ever seen him be that type of a marksman? I mean,
I don't know.
That's just, I mean, it just, the thing is that this series, by keeping this clone's helmet on the entire time and giving him some of the lines they did, they are kind of putting some mystery out there for us to, it's kind of a mystery box type of a thing. Who is this clone? They're making us wonder. And it could very well just be some average clone we've never heard of.
Right.
But I do feel like they were deliberate with some of the stuff that they said the last time we saw him, the Extraction episode, that made us start to wonder this. And it could just be a red herring to have us thinking about that and not about something else. I mean, it could be a distraction. I don't know.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah. So
Could be a whole new character too. Like you said,
yeah.
just a red herring just to throw us off and be like, "Oh, could it be Tech? Could it be Cody? Could it be this? Could it be that?"
Yeah. What did
So
you think about Omega leaving behind Lulu, the little Tuca doll, and Tech's goggles in that museum?
Oh, that was so sad. But I understood why she did it
Mhm.
because she knew that where she was going, she wasn't going to be able to keep them anyways, that they would have taken them from her on Tantis and who knows where they would have ended up. So
Mhm.
she might as well just go ahead and leave them with people who she knew loved her and cared for her and that they would be appreciated in her absence.
Yeah. See, when I saw that, I thought the direction they were going to go with this episode was that the Bad Batch was actually going to have left when that clone shows up, and then he was going to wander into that room and then see those things and know that they had been there.
Oh, gotcha.
But clearly, that's not the way the story went. But I was just trying to figure out where they were
Mhm.
going. Since they made such a point to show us that. Um, but and then the other thing we had here again, we've been talking about this all season, but the relationship between Omega and Crosshair, that's been the feature Bad Batch Omega relationship of the season. And we've had rounds of Hunter and Omega and Wrecker and Omega and then Tech and Omega from the previous seasons, but they've really been focusing on Crosshair and Omega. And so Omega basically decides that if she doesn't do something, if she doesn't turn herself in, then they're going to wipe out Pabu, and they can't let that happen. And Crosshair is about as distraught as Crosshair ever gets
Mhm.
over this. He's like, no, you can't do that. And it's, and you could just see, Omega, if he could plead, that was it. I was kind of heartbroken for him, which is really weird to think I would have gotten that point with that character based on where we saw him prior to this season.
No, I completely agree with you, and he was even trying to utilize the the way of what Hunter would want us to stick to the plan, and using
Mhm.
that as an excuse, and we really knew that he just didn't want her to give herself up, but yeah, he's like a little lost puppy dog, and just the fact that I know skipping ahead towards the end here, but that he missed getting that tracker on there,
Yeah.
after Omega just pleaded with him and said, this is our break. This is what we've been wanting. That we need to know where Tantis is. We can get the coordinates. You just have to put that tracker on the ship and then he doesn't do it. But yeah, there was also that one scene too that I love where when they're looking up when Hunter was hanging off the side of that one gunship and Omega says, "Is that Hunter? Hunter?" And Crusher goes, "Uh-huh."
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. Like, that's yeah, not surprising. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I really like the way Crosshair has reintegrated himself into the group. It went from being something
Mhm.
that was everyone walking around on eggshells at the beginning of the season to now it's like the old times with them. And I can't help but think it's even better than it was
Oh,
in the
yeah.
past because Crosshair is a very different person based off the trauma he's been through and
Mhm.
what we've seen. And so it's been interesting. And, before it's even the statement, Hunter would want us to stick to the plan is not the same thing as good soldiers follow orders.
So
It's,
true. Good
it,
observation.
it's the way he talks now and the way he
Mhm.
relates to everybody else. And he developed a friendship in, a prior episode that Wrecker points out. And rather than like say something insulting to Wrecker, he just kind of groans, it's just like, let him be. And,
Right.
he knows this type of stuff. So he's definitely evolved as a character and I like his story arc here. And yeah, I just felt, as much as I didn't want Omega to get captured because I want Omega to be safe, I didn't want Omega to get captured because of what it was going to do to Crosshair.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my
So
gosh. Yeah, but you know what? I mean, Omega's going to be able to handle herself. She's been to Tantiss. She's lived there. She kind of knows her way around a little bit. And even though she's going as a prisoner, quote unquote, she's still going to have Emerie.
Yeah. She seemed very confident sitting in the
Mm-hmm.
back of that ship as a prisoner, even though, they found her comlink, so they disabled that. She doesn't know necessarily that Crosshair missed with his tracker, but you think she's got something else up her sleeve on this?
I would think so, but then again, I mean, I don't know. But I did appreciate how she was kind of trying to use her meditation, there at the end to calm herself and
Yeah.
and that type of thing. And who knows, maybe she was trying to reach out with the force. Even though
We'll
we don't
see.
know if she's actually got the counts to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, we got Badger in this episode. She was a good
Oh,
dog.
yeah. Everyone loves Badger. The
Indeed.
whole town, the whole island loved Badger.
Indeed, indeed. All right. Well, any other final thoughts on this one before we wrap it up?
The music in this one was very Kylo Ren-ish, I
Oh,
felt
yeah.
like. It gave me that, da 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 da, that kind of a feel, and
Mhm.
it really did fit the whole mood, the whole aesthetic of this for sure. But I'm so looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Yeah, and we're down to the final 4.
I
So,
know.
wow.
Just like
Should be
March
quite
Madness, but it's April.
should be quite a ride. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then, we'd like to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of the Bad Batch. We hope you've enjoyed it. And if so, please make sure you hit the subscribe button to Podcast Stardust on your podcatcher choice, and then you'll get all of our future episodes covering the final 4 episodes of the Bad Batch that we've been lamenting. We're down to that.
Mhm.
We'd also like to remind you can find our entire catalog of shows over on retrozap.com, which has the entire previous 711. Most podcatchers only leave the last 1 to 300. If so, we got tons of content at this point. I also like to remind you that RetroZap is home to several other great podcasts covering everything from the MCU and DC to Dune, Star Trek, and a whole lot more. So, if you're wondering what you can do to help us out, we would greatly appreciate your 5-star ratings and reviews on whatever podcatcher it is that you use to catch the show, especially if that's Apple Podcasts. And it's also extremely helpful if you can share the show with your friends on social media, like the episodes on YouTube and other places that support that type of a thing. That just generates positivity in the algorithm and makes the whole thing go. Don't ask me how. It just does. But Jay, you want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are one more time and where else we can be found around the internet.
Yeah, we won't even pretend to understand those algorithms, but when they work well, we like it. So we are very easily found on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Podcast Stardust. And as Dennis was mentioning, we have tons of places where you can listen to us and find us. And another one of those is Spotify. And I know a lot of people are starting to, rate and review us over there too. So if you'd like to jump in on that, we'd really appreciate it. And we also have our 2 YouTube channels. So our regular YouTube and our YouTube Music, where you can subscribe and download and also leave reviews over there. And if you want to talk to us in real time, you can head over to our Discord room, which is part of the RetroZap Discord server. And so, as Dennis was just mentioning, there's tons of geekery going on through RetroZap. And so, you're bound to find a room that you can talk to your little nerdy heart content. And there's just so much fun going on over there. So, the link to that will be in our show notes. And we also have a TeePublic store, which has 7 different podcast show logo designs available. And that one is also in our show notes if you'd like to snag either a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, a coffee mug, or boundless other types of items. That's over there. And we also still have our partnership with Saber Masters going on. And so if you use our referral code Stardust at checkout, you can receive an extra $10 off your 2-for-1 Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0 if that's what you'd like to snag. And those are 2 for $199 right now. And Dennis and I cannot say enough about those lightsabers. And if you want to have all the deets on that, go to our last World Between Worlds and you can listen to all of the details there. And again, the link to that will also be in our show notes. So with that, Dennis, I know things are happening with Star Trek. So why don't you fill us in on what the latest is or will be?
Right. So as of the day this comes out, Star Trek Discovery Season 5 will premiere the previous day. So my wife and I will soon be breaking that down on a new episode of Warp Trails, which is our Star Trek podcast devoted to all the shows that have been coming out on Paramount Plus. So that is the prior seasons of Discovery, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, and Picard. If you want to catch our show, then the best place to do that is just to head to your podcatcher of choice, look for the Retro Zap podcast feed because it is exclusive to that, and you can find all of the episodes as they come up there. If you want to check out the past episodes, the best place to do that is on retrozap.com itself and look for the Warp Trails page. Jay, I know April is really busy for you with cosplay, so you want to write everybody about all the deets.
Absolutely. So coming up next weekend, the 12th through the 14th, I will be in Cleveland for Fan Expo Cleveland, where I will be debuting my original concept Mandalorian based on Tahiri Vela. And so I've been posting tons of work in progress, pictures and stories, and on my feed of my armor build and just all of the fun stuff that I've been able to do and learn there. And I will also be in Worcester, Ohio on the 21st of April for a little con here in my hometown. And you can always catch me as Ahsoka, Hera, the Force Sister, and various other things as well. So just having tons of fun. And again, you can check that out at j.snips cosplay.
All right. So upcoming on the show on Monday, we'll be getting into some Star Wars news, and there's some good stuff in that episode. And then on Wednesday, Jay and I decided we want to talk some Sith, talk some Mandalorians. And so we're doing that with a look at the Clone Wars Season 5, episodes 14 through 16. Go check those out and then stick around for the discussion on Wednesday. So thanks for listening to episode 712 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great weekend. And until next time, may the Force be with you.